Hello everyone, how are we all doing? Hope everyone's having a great day. Back for part 2. I'm not going to lie, I was very surprised there was a part 2 because I felt like everything was covered in part 1. I'm just trying to think of other reasons why Germany couldn't win. Yeah, I felt like he covered all the main points in part 1. Mainly, the production, fuel supplies, stuff like that. I don't really know what else we can get into, but that's going to make it all the more interesting probably. So let's go ahead and get into it. See what we got. Oh my god. Medal of Honor. I was like, where's this from? I haven't saw that in years. This is back in like PlayStation 1? PlayStation 2?
Excellent work with the German miss, Powell. Here's to hoping better sources will be used in the future. However, our intel has picked up reports of continued resistance in the comment sections. Mentions of Dunkirk and who not to invade seem widespread.
Oh, well, we've kind of covered this.
Directly into the comment section, with your primary objective being to root out these myths. Be cautious, though. Reports indicate that the Wereabouts will be armed with Cold War-era memoirs and David Irving books. Godspeed, Lieutenant.
Good speed. Ah, that's brilliant how he's edited this. This is so good.
Stay secure online and never forget a password again. Due to Germany's lacking in the population, industrial, and raw materials sectors, they could not have pulled out a victory in the war they started in 1939. And it sorta got out of hand.
I think we should read the comments.
Just don't attack the Soviets. Straight, just kill yourself. That dude wrote a paragraph. That dude wrote a story. Germans really screwed up not finishing Great Britain. Look forward to Russia. Yeah, we kind of covered this in sorry, I shouted then. In the previous videos.
I found that, along with some people agreeing with me, there were a lot of dissenting opinions of yet more ways that people thought the final victory could be achieved. And I am here today to respond to them. And also probably clear up what I meant at the end of the last video talking about limited use of alternative history. Here are a few more ways Germany could not have won World War II.
Kill the British at Dunkirk.
One thing I have seen brought up a few times is that if Hitler had not let the British Expeditionary Force get away at Dunkirk, that later the troops could not be used during Operation Overlord and thus no Western Front, with the implication that the German troops could have been sent east to stop the Soviets. This, however, has two problems. Firstly, the BEF was not simply allowed to leave France as this narrative suggests. In Mein Kampf, Hitler does speak highly of the British at times and suggests that they could be a potential ally, but this is clearly without a strong grasp of British culture and political policy, and was always discussed with Germany being above Britain and having them be administrators of the Reich, but only if they could shake their, quote, Jewish influence. Furthermore, he realized that Britain was against his intentions in the East and would become a barrier there. All this being said, by the time of the invasion of France, Britain was definitely an enemy, and Hitler was doing them no favors. So then why Dunkirk? Well, this was an operational failing, not a peaceful gesture. On May 15th...
Yeah, I'm sure he sent in the Air Force rather than the ground troops, right? I mean, I think at Dunkirk there was, what, 300,000 troops? 100,000 troops? So it wasn't... obviously, that is a massive number. But if they all would have died, as devastating that would be, it wouldn't be crippling.
1940, the Germans broke through the French 2nd and 9th armies and steamed ahead night and day, thanks in part to some tablet boys, towards the coast. Although these gains were good for the Germans, the mechanized forces were quickly running out of supplies and were leaving their flanks exposed, which opened them to being cut off, the result of which could cause ruin for the German plans. It is at this point a nervous Hitler, being counseled by Generals von Kluge and von Rundstedt, gave a halt order to secure the flanks and allow the exhausted panzer divisions to refit. Check out this video by Mark Gurges for more. Upon the halt, our favorite drug-addled flyboy Goering promised the Luftwaffe could destroy the British at Dunkirk, and although he failed, I would hardly call the actions of the Luftwaffe just letting the British go. With thousands being killed, over 200 ships being sunk, over 100 planes shot down, and the loss of all the BEF's equipment, Hitler even realized that the halt was an error and resumed the attack while the evacuation was underway, and it was only successful due to the brave French soldiers that held out until it was complete. But even if he had let them go, there are still more brave French soldiers that held out until it was complete. But even if he...
Why is he dabbing? This is where the dab come from, and I thought it was Migos this whole time.
had let them go, there are still more problems asserting that this means a German victory in the war. Britain had to rearm all the soldiers evacuated, which is a huge loss and took some time. This force, when returned to England, was not in any way ready to turn around and invade France, although the troop reserves were good to have if Germany decided to invade. But they were not in fighting condition for a long time. But most importantly, Britain is not the only nation present at D-Day. A combined landing force of American, British, and Canadian forces, along with smaller groups from other countries, landed and fought on the Western Front. Although the troop loss, if Dunkirk had failed, may have limited Britain's number of troops, the United States, having only mobilized about 9% of its population in the course of the war, could have very realistically filled in the gaps as it did in reality with the British equipment losses. But all of this still doesn't take into account where the real war is being fought, in the East. The German army will be decidedly on its back foot after Kursk, and the Soviets have massive offensives planned in 1944 regardless of what the Western Allies do. Would the defeat of Germany have taken longer without the Western Front opening? Of course it would. But by 1944, the Soviets have a decisive upper hand and will push the Germans back to Berlin. So to say the war could have been shifted if the British had 300,000 fewer troops ignores the reality of what the Germans were truly up against by 1944.
I mean, it does make you really question the motives of the Allies if you think about it. Like, this isn't new information that the Russians would eventually turn around, go on a counter-offensive and steamroll through Eastern Europe. I think that much was known by the Allies, which would mean the evident fall of Germany, Nazi Germany. So then why would the Allies invade? And I think the answer to that is to stop the spread of Russian influence in the region. Not primarily. That wouldn't have been the only reason. It would have been, to liberate France, to push forward and put more pressure on the Germans. But I don't for 1 second believe it was to take pressure off the Russians. Stalin was quoted saying that the Allies would fight to the last Russian before they invaded Europe. You got to remember, we didn't actually put boots on the ground in Europe till 1944. Stalin wanted us to invade much, much sooner than this and, to take pressure off them. So it does make you question why the Allies decided that, the summer of 1944 was a good time to invade. Was it to stop the spread of communist influence? I think that played a big part in it, yeah. Stalin could have actually taken Germany a lot quicker, but he kind of dilly-dallied around the Eastern European countries, setting up small governments, not setting them up at the time, but making sure that they were definitely under the influence of Russia. So yeah.
This is another one I saw a lot. Just don't invade the Soviet Union.
What was Hitler doing then?
This is another one I saw a lot. Just don't invade the Soviet Union, or just don't declare war on the United States. And although these comments are puzzling on the surface, as removing a major combatant redefines what the war is, and you are now describing how to win a smaller conflict, there are reasons this doesn't work that are all to do with character motivation and why these things were going to happen unless you fundamentally change who the Germans and Hitler were, and then stray into fiction. Let's first start with the Soviet Union. If you read Mein Kampf, don't do it, it's not a very good book, or listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches, both in public and in...
I recommend reading it. I've read it. Yep, I know what you're saying. Ideologically, it's not tip-top, but, it's a good read.
Don't do it, it's not a very good book, or listen to a lot of Hitler's speeches, both in public and in private. He fixates on this idea of Judeo-Bolshevism, which is a rather outdated term that grew out of the idea of a Jewish conspiracy that had created communism, and the two were the biggest evils facing the Aryan nation. There's a whole rabbit hole to go down here with multiple theorists and their ideas, but I'm not going to go into it here. But that's the basic idea, and Hitler subscribed to it. And the result of this is Hitler's main goal being to destroy the Soviet Union and become the savior of the Aryan people in his eyes, and in the process, wiping out millions of subhuman Slavs and resettle the land with Germans. Hitler saw this as his destiny, meaning he was going to do it at some point, and that this fictitious Hitler that would win World War II by not invading the East is just that, fiction. He ceases becoming the Hitler that we know and that existed, and now we're talking about a made-up story. Now, as to why the Soviet Union was invaded when it was, comes down to two things: resources and, frankly, paranoia. Germany, as I outlined in my previous video on this, spent a lot of the war with fairly limited oil resources, and knew that it couldn't support this attack any later than June of 41, with all the fuel that the battle over Britain was consuming. And even the trade with the Soviet Union would not make up for this deficit. So the High Command felt they had to go in when they did, before the army would not be able to move as they needed to finish the campaign by September, the time in which the High Command figured the Soviet Union would collapse in on its itself under the weight of the German attack.
Yeah,
And I'll point you
okay.
to David Stayhill again for more information.
Sorry, I haven't really said too much this video. I am just interested at what he's got to say. I've just realised that this might be a bit too quiet for you guys. I'm sorry. I apologise if it's been really quiet into the video.
Would not be able to move as they needed to finish the campaign by September, the time in which the High Command figured the Soviet Union would collapse in on itself under the weight of the German attack. And I'll point you to David Stayhill again for more information on that. The other aspect was, as I said, paranoia. I've often seen this assertion stated in a different way of, don't break the alliance with the Soviet Union, although I wouldn't even frame the German-Soviet non-aggression pact as an alliance in the way you think of with the Axis and Allies. The treaty was much more in the vein of, you don't get in our way, we won't get in your way, let's trade some stuff. And it was very uneasy at many points before and during its existence, becoming most volatile during combat between German and Soviet soldiers during the Poland campaign, after the Germans overran the territory that was designated as theirs and moved into territory promised to the Soviets that actually contained oil fields, making it not very subtle what the Germans were trying to do. Both Stalin and Hitler knew that some form of war was coming, just not when and who would start it, but going out of their way for the most part to not provoke it, and they didn't trust each other whatsoever. Now, I'm not implying any kind of Suvorov preventative war type thing. The Soviet Union was refitting and probably wouldn't be ready for a large war until at least mid-1942, but with these two ideologically opposing powers taking territory so quickly right next to each other, it was something that was bound to happen as soon as one of them felt they were in a position to make the first move. By 1941, the Germans felt they were, and they took the opportunity. For more on this, and the German-Soviet clashings in Poland, I'll point you towards Stephen Kotkin's second book in his Stalin series, or this video of him talking.
That looks like an interesting book. I've never read it. Please let me know if you've read that book. Waiting for Hitler. Stalin. I might check that out.
About it. The declaration of war on the US is a bit more tricky, especially given that Hitler was aware of the industrial capacity of the nation. However, he saw the US as very internally focused and figured that it would take them much longer to mobilize than it did.
Which they were. You know, I think wasn't Roosevelt, every politician at the time was kind of going on the notion that leaders wouldn't drag the young lads into another European war, which is understandable if I was an American citizen at the time. Even with what was going on in Europe, it can kind of be classed as, bearing in mind he wasn't fully educated on, the events of the Holocaust at the time. You just saw European nations going to war as they had already done previously. You would be inclined to say, no, I don't want my son to go to war, to fight for Europe, to fight for someone that doesn't interest us. Can we sit here, not when there's problems on our own doorstep, you want to sit here and fix these, which is perfectly understandable. So if a president-elect ran and said that I promise not to take us into another war, they'd have my vote pretty soon. I think Theodore Roosevelt obviously had more information than the average Joe and saw fit to supply Britain, behind the backs of the American public, which Britain is forever grateful for, and we are taught that in our education quite extensively. I think it became pretty apparent in the later stages that this wasn't just a European problem. I think if Pearl Harbor never happened, I do think eventually America would have joined the war regardless. Would they have joined with the ferocity that they did as to retaliate to Pearl Harbor? I'm not too sure. But definitely, I think I heard America being described once as that if you just picked up America and tipped it on its side, then millions of troops, tanks, boats, and airplanes just fell out of it and landed into the war bucket. There was massive appeals at the time, buy war bonds and help save America. The American economy just absolutely militarized, and I don't think Hitler was aware at the time that this could happen in such a short period of time. America's economy was booming already. It already had a big military. But then, with obviously Britain buying supplies, America leasing supplies to England, it was like the whole economy just went, right, okay, let's go to war. And, I don't know why I'm explaining this, you already know this, I'm just kind of recapping.
About it. The declaration of war on the US is a bit more tricky, especially given that Hitler was aware of the industrial capacity of the nation. However, he saw the US as very internally focused and figured that it would take them much longer to mobilize than it did. Hitler always planned for war with the United States, as outlined in his second book, written but not published in 1928, but wanted to put it off until he was ready, often skipping on details about how it would be done. He began to assume that, due to some anti-German sentiments from Roosevelt, the Americans would declare war in 1942, coming to the aid of the Allies like they did in World War I. Piggybacking off the previous statements about the Soviets, he figured he could end the war in the East and turn and fight the West. This feeling ended, though, as the Soviet campaign continued to drag on and 1942 loomed. The German Navy had been asking for war with the United States for some time, as Hitler had been holding them back to not provoke them, knowing that going against the US Navy, the Kriegsmarine would come up lacking. Hitler's solution to this was Japan, which had a large navy that he thought could tie up the Americans until he was done in Russia, then turn westward and save his plan. He constantly reassured the Japanese that Germany would throw in with them if they expanded their territory south into US-held islands. This was among many attempts to get Germany and Japan to fight the same enemy, which also included trying to get Japan to invade the Soviet Union from the east in June. Although Japan kept Hitler in the dark as to when they were going to attack, Hitler was very pleased when they did and immediately lifted all restrictions on his navy to attack US ships, and later declared war a few days later after his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, said,
That's not actually well known. From my experience, I think the general consensus was that Hitler was furious when the Japanese invaded Pearl Harbor, and that he didn't like them because they just woke up the US. You know, that wasn't the case at all. Even though it is a funny meme, because the memes of him being furious because they know that America is coming is true. But at the time, he was very pro-war with America. You know, he even tried to convince Mexico to invade. You know, and then obviously the British captured the letter, give it to the US, and the rest is history. Yeah. Even though the memes are funny, though.
To attack. Hitler was very pleased when they did and immediately lifted all restrictions on his navy to attack US ships, and later declared war a few days later after his foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, said, "A great power does not allow itself to be declared war upon, it declares war on others." Now, this decision may have been flawed with the hindsight of putting too much faith in the Japanese Navy and underestimating the US's ability to fight on two fronts and mobilize so quickly, but knowing that Hitler did plan to fight the US way back in the 20s, the timing may be bad given what we know now, but it was not something that he was just not going to do, in the same way he was not going to just opt out of invading the Soviet Union.
This guy edits his videos so well, and the way he illustrates his points are amazing. That's something that I lack. Even though I have the kind of intelligence to have these conversations, sometimes I can't illustrate my points as good as this guy. I know I understand that he's scripted, so he's talking, but it sounds very natural and like he's just having a normal conversation. He does it very well.
This is the one that I see the most. Take the British out before you turn east. As if it was that simple. The Germans tried this. First by attempting to bomb the British into submission, which didn't work, and second by planning the invasion of the British home island in an operation named Sea Lion. This was going to be the amphibious assault that would take Britain out of the war, and plans were drawn up and early preparations were made. But before—
So sorry, just to pause again. 2 videos we done. What was it? The alternate history. What if Germany won? And then I made the point that it wouldn't be that simple to just invade England, blah, 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 as the guy posed. And there was a few people in the comments that said, no, it probably would have happened that easy. I think this guy's about to explain why it wouldn't.
By planning the invasion of the British home island in an operation named Sea Lion. This was going to be the amphibious assault that would take Britain out of the war, and plans were drawn up and early preparations were made. But before going through with it, the Germans themselves realized this wasn't going to work and cancelled it. The short answer for why is the Royal Navy and the inability of the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe to control the channel. The German Navy would be unable to keep the channel clear of British warships to enable troops and supplies to reach the British coast unless the army's landing was on a very narrow front, resulting in less water needing to be covered. Knowing the coast was going to be heavily defended, the army rejected this plan as they would need a wide landing front so they were not just feeding men into a meat grinder. In short, the Germans did not have the material to carry out a successful landing without it either bogging down and being cut off on the ground or being simply sunk on the way to its destination. In the 70s, the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst wargamed the scenario with conditions favorable to the Germans and came up with the operation being a total failure. Some commenters have gone as far as to suggest using paratroopers to take the British down, but I think you need to only look as far as Crete and Arnhem to see how badly an unsupported airborne operation can go. The Germans would still have to land by sea to resupply them and get relief troops on the ground, and the Royal Navy was too large an obstacle to allow this to happen, even by the Germans' own admission.
Yeah, pretty much. That's kind of what I was alluding to in the the previous videos, the Royal Navy was massive at the time, and I feel like people kind of don't like it. Not they don't like it when I say that, but it's just like you can't just say that every time we talk about the Navy. And I appreciate it can get frustrating, but it's the truth. Like if I said now to you, oh, Britain could invade America because, you know, their Navy would just be somewhere else. You're like, well, that's not fucking true because our Navy's massive. And yes, it is, and that's kind of what I was talking about last time. Well, was this Hearts of Iron? It's Hearts of Iron, isn't it? I think it's called that. Yeah.
To allow this to happen, even by the German. One particular comment out of all of them really stood out to me. It began with, if the Nazis weren't Nazis, they would have won. And I think this really speaks to the core of my point. Alternative history is fun. It makes for good Hoi 4 games. But when really talking about it seriously, it's really hard to come by any academic conclusions outside of a few days of speculation. Because you begin building assumption on assumption on assumption, and before you know it, you have changed the motivations and decision-making patterns of everybody you're talking about. And you are then just writing fan fiction.
This is your brain. This is your brain on alternative history.
Would Germany have won World War II if the Nazis weren't in power? Maybe. But it's also equally likely they wouldn't have started the war, or joined the Allies, or anything else. If there's no basis in reality to do with the people you are talking about in your assumption, what's the point? Germany decided to start a war that within a little over 2 years would see them taking on 3 superpowers at once, with the resources of most of the world behind them. Add in strategic mistakes and intelligence failures, it paints a very grim picture from the start, regardless of decisions made after the fact. Speaking of intelligence failures, don't let your private information go the way of the German armies. There are plenty of Alan Turings out there looking for information and private data that do not have the same honor and duty to country that the original did.
Sorry, I've got a football under my desk.
Including banking information. Then before you know it, all your internet for almost your one-stop shop for your digital...
Okay, so yeah. Yeah, you know, he done a great job of answering the comments. I feel like he's a very good YouTuber. I didn't subscribe last time. I did mean to. He does a very good job of illustrating his points and backing up evidence. Yeah, backing up his points with evidence. He does it very well. He's a great YouTuber. I'm ashamed to say that I didn't see him. I'd never heard of him before the videos that you guys told me to react to. But yeah, he does a great channel, and he's very clever. You can already tell. But as for the Germans, yeah, you know, it's you start getting into alternate history when you start saying, you know, you shouldn't have done this, you shouldn't have done this. I think one of the things that really never gets mentioned, and it should, is Italy just really didn't pull its weight in the war. This wouldn't have changed World War II at all, but I do feel like the war would have went on a bit longer if Italy really, you know, got its act together and started holding and taking ground in North Africa. And, you know, capturing the oil fields there off the English and, you know, supplying the rest of the Axis with the oil down in Africa. But, you know, things like that, again, it's just alternate history. They'll extend the war, but, you know, with 3 superpowers, it's just never going to happen. I'd even go as far to say that Russia could have won the war alone. I take that back. I take that back. It's possible, but I don't have enough evidence to base that claim, so I'm just not going to bother. Let me know what videos you guys want me to do next. You know, nearly at 6k now. The channel's really slowed down a lot recently, and it's okay. I like doing YouTube, so it's not a big problem, but you know, 6k would be great, man. I need to find another channel like Oversimplified, man. Oversimplified killed it for me. I was on like 1.1 when I done Oversimplified in like early September. By the end of October, I was on like 5k. Jesus Christ. I need to start doing some clickbait videos. Anyway, yeah. You know, like, comment, subscribe, all of that, guys. I really appreciate you all joining me. And have a great day. Make sure you tell me what to react to. Peace out.